Who are the 5 types of people who can ruin your life?
Well, this is really very interesting these days. We have kind of an umbrella term, high conflict people or high conflict personalities, which have 4 characteristics, but there's 5 subgroups. So that's the 5 types. So let me just start with high conflict personalities are people who are preoccupied with blaming others. It's all your fault, they say. And they don't take responsibility for their part in the problem. In fact, they can't see it. They can't connect the dots back to their own behavior. Then they have a lot of all or nothing thinking. They tend to see people all good, all bad, solutions to problems. It's like there's only one solution. It's my way or the highway, Bill, and that kind of thinking. Then we often see unmanaged emotions. There are the people that start yelling about this. Maybe they throw papers or objects, slam doors, storm out of meetings, um, yelling, etc., where it's really not appropriate. Not everybody shows that. Unmanaged emotions for some people are quite controlled, but they drive them to be vindictive, to be domineering, to be intrusive, to try to take over other people and control them. And the last is extreme behaviors. And at first, I used to say you need to see a pattern over time. Most people might do an extreme behavior here or there, but see a pattern over time. But many high conflict people engage in extreme behaviors that 90% of people would never do. And so that's often a sign this is a high conflict person. And we think of them as about 10% of adults. Now, the subtypes basically seem to overlap with personality disorders. And for mental health professionals, which I am, I'm a licensed clinical social worker in California. We have a diagnostic manual that lists 10 personality disorders, but only 5 of them seem to be prone to this high conflict pattern. And not everybody with these 5 even is a high conflict person, but I'll talk about them. First, of course, is narcissistic personality disorder. Now, people talk today, everybody's a narcissist. Well, you're a narcissist. And not everybody is a narcissist. But in terms of narcissistic personality disorder, they're looking at maybe 6% of adults. And
How
this
do you
is
know if someone's
research.
a narcissist?
Beg your pardon?
How do you know if someone is a narcissist?
Well, to me, it's if they have narcissistic personality disorder. There's 9 criteria and things like, and you have to have 5 out of 9 to have a diagnosis of that. And there are things like arrogance, lack of empathy, demand for excessive admiration. They see themselves as superior to people, as special. They expect special treatment. They feel entitled. They put you down. So that kind of pattern of behavior, people think of narcissists as self-centered. Oh, you're a narcissist. All you care about is yourself. So, you might be talking about, I don't know, 80% of us. To some extent, you have to care about yourself to survive in the world. But for it to become a disorder, it's really self-defeating and it's harmful to the people around you. And that's where I see the definition. It's like it's gotta be extreme. People
Mm,
people promote themselves. You have to in today's world. You wanna get a job, you've gotta, promote yourself. But that doesn't mean that you have to put other people down. That's where the problem with narcissistic personalities come in. So, I guess
got it.
my definition where it's a problem is the putting other people down part.
Yeah, 'cause
Yeah.
all of us in some way, especially in the way of dealing with social media, are looking for attention. We're trying to
Right.
promote ourselves. And just the way the algorithms are based is it just kind of, I guess, puts out that behavior, kind of lures that behavior in. But you're saying the distinguishing point of the disorder part of being narcissistic is when it harms other people, like putting other people down.
Right. And it actually harms the person too. It's self-defeating. People don't have, generally, are high conflict people don't have friends or don't have really stable friendships. They alienate people often. And so this is the disorder. Uh, More people have traits, but I said about 6% of adults. There's a big study done 20 years ago by the National Institutes of Health. And they said about 6% of people have narcissistic personality disorder. And that's where it's problematic. I mean, there's therapy for that if people go, but most narcissists think they know more than the therapist, so they don't go. Um, but some people have had successful treatment for this and are happier and have more meaningful friendships because they've learned to take the edge off of this behavior and maybe outgrew the disorder diagnosis. So you might have traits, but not a disorder. So
Yeah.
that's one of them is the narcissistic personality. A second one's the borderline personality disorder. And this is also about 6% of adults, according to that big study. And this disorder is wide mood swings, sudden intense anger, fear of abandonment. So people with these characteristics often cling to relationships. You see this a lot in relationships. We see this in high conflict divorces, where it's really hard for people to let go of each other. We see this to some extent in domestic violence cases, where the sudden and intense anger just takes over and they're blaming the other person. So they feel entitled to hit them and maybe to grab them and hold on to them because they don't want to lose their partner, but they want to be in charge. They want to be in control. So that's one of the five types. But not everybody with narcissistic personality disorder, not everybody with borderline personality disorder is a high conflict person. Some are more make their own lives miserable without targeting other people. Antisocial personality disorder, and this is, maybe 40% of the prison population. People that violate the laws, people that lie a lot, people that are very aggressive, willing to hurt other people to get what they want. They lack remorse, um, and they take a lot of risks, which sometimes kill them, but sometimes really damage other people. So they are, I'd say most of them are high conflict people for sure. Extreme behaviors. They have a higher incidence of substance abuse too. All five of these have a higher incidence of substance abuse. I'd say antisocial has a higher instance of dealing drugs, selling drugs. So it's not just they use more, but they also put these out into the world more. Then there's histrionic personality disorders, very dramatic. Oh my goodness, it's terrible. They tell dramatic stories, grab attention. You kind of think of Hollywood. Some people have turned this into a good career. Um, Being very dramatic can really help you, as an actor or actress, etc. Um, but this personality can also be high conflict, make false allegations. Antisocial does a lot of that. Histrionic does some of that. Um, really driving conflict. And then paranoid personality, personality disorder, where people think there's conspiracies out to get them. The company's blocking my career, and it's that evil person over there that's blocking my career, when in fact, it may be their own lack of skills is blocking their career, but they see all of these high conflict people and their subgroups see the fault as someone else's. All their problems are someone else's fault. And that's what makes them high conflict because they don't try to change. So that's the five types. Like I said, not everybody with a diagnosis of this personality disorder is a high conflict person, but there tends to be these traits, these behaviors.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's go through Why should someone listening to this care about this? Why does understanding anything about high conflict people help improve the quality of their lives?
Well, in many ways, it's easy once the person has experienced some kind of relationship with somebody like this. So it could be a dating relationship, could be a marriage, could be a coworker, a supervisor, um, could be, people in law enforcement. These folks target law enforcement. They like to hate them and spit on them and see them as, treating them like a victim. People in government agencies, people come and complain, and this isn't to say there aren't real problems, but these are the people with a pattern that supersedes real problems, and they just stay focused on institutions, education, healthcare, where everybody expects everybody to be nice. These personalities kind of stand out, and especially if they get in positions of power, um, can really destroy other people's lives. Like department heads in a college, if they're one of these people, they may really sabotage a graduate student's career, don't give them a recommendation and things like that just because they don't like them. And I've talked to people who've experienced that. So this is a minority of people. I'd like to say about 10% of people have high conflict personalities. When people run into someone like this, they know it and they're very confused and distressed, keeps them awake. It's like workplace bullying. This is your workplace bullies. Domestic violence in families. This is those folks. People that yell and scream and blame in families but don't hit are some of these folks. So the average person, especially if they're young, maybe haven't run into someone like this yet, but I predict they will. It's just a matter of time. And the people that have experienced relationships with people like this very much want this information because what they're doing generally doesn't work. And what really works is often the opposite of what your gut instinct is to do.
Yeah. I mean, you said 6% of people tend to be narcissists or people that have borderline personalities. It sounds like a pretty low amount. You're talking about 1 in 20 roughly. But I would imagine it's kind of like negative reviews. It's often the negative reviews that actually are the loudest.
Yes,
And it's probably similar in that when you're at a workplace or when you have family members, they just stand out, even though you're only going to run into 1 out of 20 of them. It's just so noticeable because they're always causing problems everywhere they go. So probably looks like there's more people than there actually is that have
right.
these personality disorders. What is the most common way that people tend to approach someone or dealing with someone with high conflict personalities, and why is that the wrong solution?
Yeah, you're kind of your amygdala in your brain, you got one in each hemisphere, says, "You're under attack, protect yourself." And so people either run and hide or they fight, they argue and fight. And and those are the 2 most common approaches where people kind of shrink and hide or go, "Hey, you're the idiot, buddy, not me," and argue with the person. So I'll tell you why both of those aren't a good idea. So arguing with the person with high conflict people doesn't work because they don't have insight into their own behavior. And people want to say, well, look how you're acting, buddy. This is caused by you. You are 99% of this problem. And what the person hears is that you're a jerk. And so they argue back with you. And it becomes emotional, and that's one of the characteristics is it kind of comes down from your higher thinking to your kind of more reactive emotions. And so I'm going to protect myself. I'm going to fight with you and I'm going to point out what's wrong with you. And so that's one of the most common responses. It's a dead end. It doesn't go anywhere and just escalates. And frankly, high conflict people can go higher than the average person. So you end up really frustrated. But running away, hiding, avoiding often means it eats away at yourself, your self esteem. It's like, I should have argued back, I should have punched him in the nose, and you walk away criticizing yourself. And that's not really healthy either because people shouldn't treat you this way. Nobody deserves to be bullied. Nobody deserves to be harassed and such. And so both of those kind of instinctive fight or flight responses um, are the most common and totally understandable, but they don't work with high conflict people.
Yeah, the quote that stands out is dealing with or fighting back with a high conflict person is like wrestling a pig in mud. You both get dirty, but
Exactly.
the pig actually enjoys it.
Right. 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 People fall into that trap all the time.
Yeah, because that would be my instinct too, which is just either completely ignore that person or the way you dealt with bullies when you were a kid and kind of what the typical advice that you get from, maybe more of like a macho parent is just fight back. And kids will oftentimes, when you show some strength, are not going to continue to pursue you. But you call these the adult bullies. So, how are adult
The-
bullies different than how you would typically deal with kid bullies?
Well, first of all, I believe that all kids try out bullying. Maybe at 3 and 4 years old, they got a sibling, and, you know, everybody tries it out. But by adulthood, 90% of people have outgrown that. And most people don't get a pattern of bullying, even as children, because you don't have friends and you get in trouble. Maybe you get injured. You punch somebody in the nose and they punch you in the nose 3 times. And it's like, okay, that's not the way to go. So about 10% of people um, come into adulthood as bullies. And this is our high conflict people. And the biggest difference is they're more manipulative. In other words, they know how to get you, with their words. They don't steal your lunchbox. Um, they spread rumors about who you are around the office or on the internet. And the internet's enabled bullies, not, child bullies, teen bullies, and especially adult bullies because of the lack of restraints. But I'd say adult bullies, the research shows that, for example, on the internet, that the people who are bullies on the internet are pretty much bullies in person. And so it's not a different group so much as a different method, and that it's not that big of a group, but on the internet, they look a lot bigger because people don't want to argue with them. People kind of drop out. You run uh, an email chain or a comments chain, and you go, I'm just getting out of that. Whereas the bullies are like, they're more persistent. And that's one of the problems is bullying isn't an incident. It's a pattern, and that's why, like workplace bullying, it's somebody that decides you're the target that they're going to harass, the person they're going to pick on. Maybe they they misplace quotes some of your equipment, um, and you can't find it, and they're laughing. um, they're they're more subtle, but you get the message. And like in workplace bullying, interferes with people's sleep, their health. They get stomach aches, headaches, maybe don't come in. It impacts productivity, all of that. But it's a pattern of behavior that, people really lose self esteem. We see this in domestic violence, in couple relationships. We see this in communities. Sometimes there's people who everybody knows harasses people in the community, and people kind of steer clear of that person. So adult bullies are in many ways more manipulative and more effective at ruining people's lives.
Yeah, it's almost this chronic, manipulative, and sneaky approach to harming someone emotionally, compared to the kid bullies where it's this acute nature of just being upfront, right in your face. The teacher breaks it up, or you just kind of end up outgrowing that process. Within adult bullies, there's really this, they're trying to fit into the rules of society, I guess, where they're not just going to punch someone in the face, but they'll do things in a sneaky way that knows that they're going to hurt the other person. And it's that kid, the adult bully at your co-working office, or your coworker named John or whoever it might be, who, like you said, steals something or knows that you have an important presentation and then will kind of mock you while you're doing your
Yeah, well,
presentation. And then you'll approach that person and they'll just be like, calm down, kind of like
oh, they'll
gaslighting
blame
you.
you. They'll blame you.
They'll
Don't
put
take
you
it
down. They'll
personally.
think you're
Yeah.
overreacting. Yeah. Yeah. And what is it to just understand people that have these high conflict personalities? Is it just that they didn't outgrow the bullying stage, the 10% of adults that don't grow out of the bullying stage, and they were bullied in elementary school or high school, and this is their way of, getting back at the world and getting more attention?
I think it's actually less that they experience bullying growing up and more has to do with a personality that was already developing. Because personality development, you look at three main factors. First is your genetic tendencies at birth. Some people have tendencies towards these personalities, like antisocial personality disorder is more common. If you have a parent with that, you're at risk of that, you're at higher risk of that yourself. First degree relatives are more likely to pass on this. So it seems to be a genetic tendency, but the other high conflict personalities also may have a genetic component to it. But the next thing is early childhood. First 5 or 6 years is when your personality is significantly developing. And so what's happening then makes a big difference. Let's say you grow up in an abusive household, your coping mechanisms may be to be very aggressive, maybe to punch people in the nose, to yell at people. And this becomes part of your personality. And then you're in an office where punching people in the nose and yelling at people doesn't work, but this is what you learn. So growing up, it's not necessarily that they're bullied, but that's the third factor is your environment, the culture you grow up in. And if you were bullied and you have maybe some tendencies towards one of these personality disorders, and early childhood taught you that you need to be aggressive and fighting a lot, then you may be an adult bully. So it's not one thing, and I'd say majority of people who are bullied, like in school or high school, things like that, do not become bullies. So that's why the personality development is, I think, the bigger factor. If someone's becoming, let's say, antisocial, it's about 4% of the adult population. And by the way, there's some overlap here. So antisocial, narcissistic, maybe 20% overlap, borderline narcissist, maybe 40% overlap. Big study done 20 years ago, National Institutes of Health came out with numbers. Whether they fit today is hard to say. I think it may be even more, but 4% of are antisocial, and antisocial personality disorder is really developing by age 15. And so someone with that personality disorder already has what they call conduct disorder, starting fires, stealing, torturing and killing small animals and pets, maybe being a bully by age 15, so that as an adult, their personality is pretty set. They're one of the biggest bullies because they lack remorse, they don't care, they may even enjoy being cruel and sadistic to you. So that's more cause than being bullied in high school.
Got it.
Got it.
Yeah. So for
Yes.
just before we get into talking about how to actually handle these personalities in more detail and depending on the context of the situations, I think there's a segment of people that can probably recognize someone that has a high conflict personality at work or the relationships or family members. But sometimes it's kind of in that gray area, right?
Mhm.
It's not as like if it's obvious, people just already know. But there are people and relationships that we have where sometimes they'll demonstrate some of these characteristics. And in our head, we don't go, oh, this person displays 5 out of the 10
Right.
potential personalities. So this person is a high conflict personality, right? It's always this ebb and flow. And we also, as humans, when we're in a bad mood or when we're not in a good place, probably demonstrate some of these more than others. So how do we really identify the people in that gray area where perhaps you know some people might just cut these people off too early instead of giving them a chance to really be more empathetic. So what is that right way of identifying these people that are in that gray area?
Yeah. Well, the best answer is you don't actually have to figure that out in order to use strategies that generally are helpful. In other words, I'll tell you 4 things that are unhelpful with high conflict people that don't work, but they maybe work somewhat with people that are in the gray areas. And this is all on a continuum. There isn't, it's not a bright line. And so I say what's important isn't do they have a disorder or not, but do they have a pattern of high conflict behavior? And if they do, then there's 4 things to avoid and 4 things to try instead. So it's more, but you can do these 4 things to try instead with anybody. They work with anybody. So you never have to figure this out. And by the way, I want to mention right now, don't tell somebody you think they're a high conflict person. It doesn't help. It doesn't motivate people to act better. I know that's why people say that. Well, you're being a high conflict person, cut it out. Well, if someone is a high conflict person, they're going to become more aggressive, more defensive when you say that. And if they're an ordinary person, they're still not gonna like you for saying that. So,
Yeah,
you don't
it's
need
also
to
a very
say that to
political
anybody.
way. It's a very politically correct way of just calling someone an asshole also, right? Most people just skip to the vulgar part. I don't think they call other people high conflict personalities, but I
Right.
understood. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and you're probably gonna ask me, what are those 4 things to avoid and those
Yes.
4 things to do? So when you're ready, I'm ready to give you those.
Please. Yes. We're on our
Okay.
seat.
So I already gave you the first thing to avoid, which is calling them a high conflict person or saying they have a personality disorder. If you think that, then adapt your approach. And adapt your approach, first of all, being careful not to use any labels, including asshole. That doesn't motivate people, especially who are. Um, but second thing is don't try to give people insight into their own behavior. It doesn't work with high conflict people. They don't reflect on their own behavior. They don't connect the dots back to themselves. And that's a characteristic of high conflict people. And it frustrates people, but you're not going to be able to say, look at what you're doing. They're not going to get that. And they're not going to like you because you're trying to tell them they have to be different. So just forget about focusing on giving them insight. Instead, talk about the choices they have now. Don't focus them inward, focus them outward. Say, if you keep doing that, I'm going to have to do this. Or let's look at your choices. You have this and this and this option. So rather than having insight, is look at choices. Then the next one is don't focus on emotions because high conflict people have a lot of unresolved emotions and they're often driven by their emotions. And so what's happening and what's really interesting here and really sad too is high conflict people don't go through the normal grieving and healing process. And, there's 5 stages of grieving and healing that have been identified when you're facing death or a friend or family member is facing death, or you're facing any big loss. loss of a job, loss of a spouse, loss of a house. Any of these, we go through this grieving process. It's 5 stages. So denial, anger, bargaining. What if I do this? What if I do that? It's bargaining against the inevitable loss. Then depression, you turn inward, feel the pain of the loss, and then the acceptance. And so, when someone passes away, usually within a year or two, you can think back fondly to that person without it stopping you in your tracks because you're just, oh my goodness, taken over. That we, as human beings, have this ability. Well, guess what? High conflict people don't have this ability. They get stuck on anger. And so if something's upsetting, pretty quickly they turn to anger. It's like, it's your fault. And no, I don't believe it. And all of this. And so they have a lot of unresolved emotions. And what many people notice is high conflict people spend a lot of time talking about the past. They're kind of reworking their grievances. Well, you were wrong to do what you did, and I was right to do what I did. And so you get this kind of constant, it's kind of stuck like a treadmill. They're just, it's all your fault. Again, remember, I've told you this before, it's all your fault. And so what we find is if you focus on emotions, they feel worse. And so if you say, how do you feel about that? Well, I feel terrible. And so we don't want to focus them on emotions. Instead, you want to focus them on thinking and doing. So let's look at what we can do now. Let's look at our options, what we can do. I have a suggestion. Why don't we do this? What do you think of that? Because if I say, why don't we do this? How do you feel about that? They're going to say they feel terrible. And I even think if you focus them on feelings when you greet them in the morning. Say, how you feeling today? Oh, terrible. You know what she did yesterday? And they're kind of off and running about their upsets. So don't focus on emotions and certainly don't try to have an emotional argument. You're not going to have any success there. So now we got three. The fourth is don't focus on the past because they're going to try to pull you into the past and arguing about what you did, what they did, etc. Just focus on the future. Whatever. Let's talk about what we can do now. What we can do now is where the action is. And so this is where these are the four things to avoid: calling names, trying to give them insight, focusing on emotions, and focusing on the past. You want to avoid those, which you can actually do with anybody. So those are harmless things to do. But I want to pause for a minute if you have any comments before I tell you what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like, in short, you're just getting them out of their own trenches, getting them out of their own heads, because their natural instinct is to be fairly pessimistic in a negative emotional state. So when you're bringing that up, you're just giving them more reasons to vent and to go
Mhm.
deeper into that state. So makes sense. And does this also apply for people that may be in that gray area
Right.
where it's not as obvious?
Yes. So like insight or self-awareness for one is high conflict people really that just blows up. They think you don't like them and they're going to fight you. They don't want to have those insights. They have a brick wall against that psychologically. People with maybe some traits, but not a disorder, may have some insight. Say, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. But I was right to do that. And so they'll like have moments of insight. So sometimes that works. Um, and that's what therapists can work with. But these folks don't seek therapy because they think it's everybody else's fault. But occasionally people can say, like, I'm going to divorce you or fire you. You need some therapy. And if you don't want that to happen, and they go, and the therapist, if the therapist says, look, look at what you're doing wrong, all this stuff at the start, they're going to blow them out of therapy. But a good therapist balances being empathetic and supportive and saying, now let's look at this thing. Did it work for you? What were you trying to accomplish when you said that thing to your boss? Um, and how did that work? That Dr. Phil's question, how's that working for you? Um, and then have support, but help them see different ways maybe more effective. And so it's that kind of approach. But when you're just in a conflict or you're in a relationship, you're not their therapist. Um, you want to steer clear of these things, even if they don't have a personality disorder. Try to focus on what to do, focus on the future, thinking, doing, and frankly, the average person often, if there's a disagreement or something, you take this approach, you may resolve your issue in 3 to 5 minutes because you're not stuck arguing about the past. So, I'd say the gray area people this works with, but this works with everybody. And a lot of times you don't know you're dealing with a high conflict person until it kinda hits you in the gut. You go, "Oh, wow, maybe there's a high conflict person." And going for insight, emotion in the past, and labeling. So, yeah, you can use this with anybody.
Great. So how do we
So
deal with these people?
okay. So here's 4 things that we figured out are generally the most effective that address areas that they have difficulty in without saying you have difficulty here. First of all is forming a connection with them. So, I call this the CARS method, CARS. That you wanna connect with them actually. Don't run away from them, don't argue with them. Connect with them with a statement that shows empathy, attention, and or respect. So they start saying, "It's all your fault." And you say, "Wow, I wanna understand your point of view. Tell me more. I'm interested." Almost immediately, they calm down because they're expecting an argument. And it's like tug of war where you're holding the rope and you let go of the rope. Don't fight with them on this. Say, "I wanna understand, tell me your point of view." Or, "I can see this is a hard time." That's empathy. "I can see this is a hard time. I hear the importance of this issue. Um, and I can understand that this is frustrating for you." And by the way, you can do all of this with kids too. These are good things with kids' behavior, empathize with them, of course, and set limits. And I'll get to that. Because in many ways, high conflict people are emotionally more like children. And so what works with children tends to work with high conflict people and vice versa. So try to connect, make a statement that shows empathy, attention, or respect. "I respect the work you've done on this project. I respect your efforts. I respect your commitment to resolving this issue. Um, I respect your relationship with our daughter or our son, in family arguments." Is by focusing on empathy, attention, and respect, you're taking it away from being adversarial to being more, let's connect with each other and let's solve the problem over there rather than you're the problem. And so that seems to be real helpful. So often a starting point is making an effort to connect. Also, by staying calm when they're getting upset, they often tend to calm down because you're being calm. They're not getting a rise out of you. And if they do, they'll just go higher and higher. So that's why you don't want to emotionally react, especially with anger. Stay calm and say, "Wow, I can see this is a really important issue for you. So let's take our time and walk through what to do about it." So that's the C of cars. A is then we want to get them analyzing, get them thinking. And so talk about choices or options. Let's look at our options now. What can we do? What can you do? Maybe they're complaining about somebody else, and you can say, "Well, let's look at your options. What could you say to them? Or what could you offer? Or how could you set limits with them? Let's look at your options." Um, And so let's analyze that. And that gets people thinking of solutions, which often moves them away from their more emotional parts of their brain into their problem solving parts of their brain. Writing lists. It's interesting when you write a list, you calm down because you're putting yourself, I believe, putting yourself into the left hemisphere of your brain where you're writing and reading, where languages and problem solving details tend to be processed. Right hemisphere does a lot of things, including protective, defensive, and often high conflict people are like reacting with their emotional brain rather than their logical brain. And so you calm the emotions with an ear statement and then say, let's look at what we can do, get them thinking and analyzing. And sometimes writing a list helps with that. Also, asking, well, what's your proposal? What do you suggest that we do? That also gets them thinking, which tends to move them away from reacting and such. So that's analyzing options. The R is responding to hostility or misinformation. And rather than arguing, someone comes at you hostilely, arguing with them is it helps to say, here's some information you may not have. Mhm. And we developed a method called BIF for emails and texts and letters where someone comes at you with hostility, often they're misinformed. And rather than arguing with that, you just focus on keep it brief. Here's some information you may not have. Keep it friendly. Thanks for letting me know your concerns and firm. Try to end the hostile conversation. And so, this method of emails, we've been teaching this for, let's see, 2007, about 18 years. And it's really calmed a lot of conversations in the workplace, also in high conflict divorce and other legal disputes. Also, businesses in the public is you're being criticized and attacked. And you might think, well, I don't want to respond. People won't pay any attention. Well, maybe they will pay attention. So it helps to have a BIF response that just says, for people's information, this is how we approach this problem and it's solved, and our customers are our first priority, and you don't need to worry about this. So that's the responding. Um, and high conflict people often have distortions like emotional reasoning. I feel it's true, so it must be true, and cut it out. And it's not true at all. But rather than saying you're lying and that's false and that's not true, is say, here's some information you may not have. So you focus it on being informative rather than argumentative. And then last is setting limits and imposing consequences if necessary. And high conflict people often don't stop themselves. And so that's why you need to set limits. Say, hey, you can't keep talking to me that way. That's really offensive. But high conflict people often ignore your limits unless there's a consequence hanging out here. So if you say, you can't keep talking to me that way, and if you do, I'm going to end this conversation. Okay, you've chosen to keep talking that way. You've chosen to end the conversation. Call me back when you're ready to talk respectfully or civilly. Goodbye. And so setting limits and imposing consequences, we've learned is important. And I'll just add here, we have a technique, I mentioned ear statements at the beginning, then proposals for analyzing. With responding, we have the BIF method. So setting limits and imposing consequences, we have a method called SLICK, setting limits and imposing consequences in 2.5 steps. So the first step, setting limits. Second is threatening the consequence or imposing it if necessary. And the half is half the time do it with an ear statement that shows empathy, attention, and respect. I wish I didn't have to do this, but it will help you. Like a parent to a child, I have to set this limit, but it will help you have more friends and be a happier person. And sometimes we set limits on friends and family that way. No, I can't lend you any more money. Um, and, I won't. Or if you don't pay me back within the week, then I'm never lending you money again. That's the consequence. I'll learn my lesson the hard way. And the half is, and I want to help you. I want you to learn it's not okay to borrow money and not pay it back, um, versus the person that's going to manipulate you and say, "Well, if you cared, Bill, you would keep lending me money even if I can't pay it back. I've had a terrible childhood, even though I'm 45. You've got to understand that I just can't be responsible like that." Well, that's the person I don't give an ear statement to because they're manipulating me. Say, "Sorry, this is the line. Don't pay me back within the week. Never lending you money again." And that's that. So that's connecting, analyzing, responding, and setting limits, the four things that do seem to work, especially with high conflict people when nothing else works.
Hey, Bill, what's like the percentage of people that have these high conflict personality disorders that perhaps with some open mindedness, which I know contradicts what a lot of these personalities have, can actually change for the long run? Because I'm thinking about, particularly in love life, or even relationships, where people get stuck in these toxic relationships. And ironically, it's often the people that are fairly healthy and logical and smart that tend to stick around these toxic relationships the longest because they have this optimistic viewpoint of thinking they can change the other person to how they
Yeah.
think. So it's like this project that they take on, and it's their own. It's like toxic in its own way for doing that. But what is that? What is the likelihood of someone that has these personalities? Can people actually change if, speaking to someone that is in a relationship like this, whether it's love, family, or just personal relationship?
Yeah. And it's a very specific question for the specific person because in general, especially if someone has a personality disorder, it's defined as an enduring pattern of behavior that's long standing. And so a small percent change. Most people aren't motivated to change until circumstances motivate them. And so when someone says, "I'm going to divorce you if you don't get some help with this," or "I'm going to fire you if you don't get some help with this," that may motivate someone to get into some treatment that actually does help them. So some people like borderline personality disorder, there's a method called dialectical behavior therapy, DBT. Over the last 20 years, a lot of therapists are trained in that in every city, just about, big city especially. DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, that helps people with that personality disorder outgrow their wide mood swings, their sudden and intense anger, that they learn to manage themselves better and and may be a happy relationship partner. Um, so things like this can help. Some people with narcissistic personalities go into therapy around 40 or 50 because they thought their life would be perfect. They're going to be a TV star, multimillionaire, and all that. And by about 40, they go, maybe there's something I need to do different because I'm not happy and I'm not a millionaire and I don't have a, TV station or whatever it is that they thought they would have because they thought they were so special. So they go into therapy, learn, oh, well, you can be special at things if you get the right skills and dedicate a lot of energy. So some of your goals may be achievable and you're standing in the way because you think they should just be handed to you. But some of your other goals might not be necessary. You don't have to be a superstar to be liked, to have friends, to, have a happy relationship. Um, Happy relationships tend to be more equal, and narcissists try to see things as superior. Learning you don't have to be superior gives them a chance to have real relationships and real happiness. So I'd say of the 5 types, that borderline is probably the most hopeful if people will get into treatment. Narcissistic, if they get into treatment with a therapist that helps them kind of balance supportiveness and behavior change. Histrionic personalities can benefit from treatment, and some do. Paranoid, people with paranoid personalities can benefit some. Antisocial personality disorder seems to be the one that's the most unchanging. And it may really be hardwired, more genetic tendency, all of that. But the real answer to your question is that people should give it a try. See if you can improve the relationship. See if the person will go, like, a couple, go to couples counseling with you and take some responsibility and learn some skills of communication. See if that can happen in the workplace. I've been consulted. We do trainings with high tech companies. We do trainings with therapists, lawyers, a whole range of professionals. But I remember consulting with a high tech company I did some training with, and they said we have a middle manager that writes these terrible emails, and we're trying to decide if we should fire her or keep her. And I said, well, teach her the Biff method and see if over, a month or two, she changes how she does that. If people change, then that's a sign to you that they can change, probably even some more. And that may be a valued employee you can keep. If somebody makes absolutely no progress, no effort, that may be someone that you're not going to want to keep. Same in the couple relationship. If they won't go to counseling, they won't try changing anything. It's all your fault. There's nothing I need to do different. That may tell you a lot that this is a dead end.
Yeah. In the world of chimps, which I guess you could say are close cousins,
Right.
um,
Our closest cousin.
closest cousins, it's often not necessarily the chimps that dominate with these super aggressive dominance, but the alliances that they form often determine who the alpha males are. And it's the people that have these tight coalitions that share foods, that form tight bonds, they're less likely to be attacked as well.
Mhm.
And including the alpha males are the ones that actually portray that dominance. It's the ones that have these tight coalitions. Would you say the same thing could apply for someone dealing with someone that has a high conflict personality? Is to have alliances in family or co-working co-workers that would allow you to, you know, not be the only person that shares these expressions with the person, but understand that like there are other people in your side of the table that might be feeling this way? Or do you think that actually will cause them to be more defensive when there are other people involved?
Um, it depends, on the settings. So generally, and it's interesting with chimps and other primates, is when you're isolated is when you're most vulnerable. And if you get beat up in the pecking order and you slink away alone, you lose status in the community. Whereas if you get in a fight and you lose and you go hang out with your friends, then you don't lose status. You just didn't get higher, but you're not lower.
Hmm.
And I think and I recommend that in the office, is find someone you can be a friend with and have those connections. It'll help you heal from an incident. Like, let's say you have a supervisor who's a high conflict person and they criticize you publicly or something like that, that there's someone you can talk about this with that goes, yeah, she was totally out of line when she did that criticism in public. So having people you can go to helps you recover, but also helps protect you. from getting picked on and isolated. So coalitions are are really, primate coalitions, human well, we're primates too. Coalitions seem to be a really good thing in terms of leadership and in terms of protection. So that's a good thing. But here's something to avoid. That is, let's say you have a supervisor who's picking on you, and you decide, I'm going to get my three buddies and we're going to confront my supervisor. So we go into the supervisor's office, and everybody says how the supervisor's, making them uncomfortable and picking on them. The supervisor is going to be quite defensive, especially if they're a high conflict person. Whereas if you can go one to one, or if you can go with a union rep or an HR person that kind of facilitates a discussion, they're not outnumbered and you're less likely to trigger defensiveness. So it's a judgment call whether to confront a high conflict person with a group or individually or with one assisting neutral kind of person. But ganging up on high conflict people doesn't work real well, but it may protect you for them to know that you have a gang around you, so don't mess with me.
Got it. How much of this solutions of dealing with these high conflict personalities transfer over to love life?
A lot. In fact, love life is where you probably see the most high conflict behavior. And the reason I say this is personality disorders, the research on personality disorders points out that disorders are really interpersonal disorders. Most mental health disorders like schizophrenia, anxiety, depression, substance use disorder, bipolar disorder, all of those are pretty much about the individual. And and personality disorders are really about interpersonal relationships and blame that, I'm not responsible, it's somebody else's fault or it's the universe's fault. So interpersonal, especially close interpersonal relationships. So mostly it shows up in families because in the workplace where you're not close to people, you might people might be functioning fine in their work, but a close relationship, we have slightly different standards, expectations, behaviors. We share more emotions. We share maybe secrets, private information. We also expect more. And so it's in close relationships, and that's like family. We expect more in a family. So I would say it mostly does show up in family relationships. And a high conflict person in a family could be a parent, could be a child. Not that children have personality disorders, but they're developing some of this. Let's say a teenager with borderline tendency, they scream at their parents, it's all your fault. And they blame their friends and they get in a lot of troubles and they pick on their siblings. So they could be developing some of this and targeting their parents. I do a lot of consultation, and a fair amount is parents of a young adult with personality problems who blames the parents for a terrible life when in fact the parents were quite ordinary. But, personality disorder people see themselves as victims in life. And so it's always somebody's fault rather than, hey, get up on your feet and put your life together. But some parents have these high conflict personalities, and their young adults want to get away from them or set limits on them. But love is probably the most intense, especially between romantic partners. And that's where you see domestic violence. And there's a higher incidence of domestic violence from people with borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. There's research looking at that. It's higher than the average person. But keep in mind, most people are never diagnosed with personality disorders. And if you have a personality disorder, you usually don't know it because it's everybody else's fault.
Yeah.
But
Nor are
if
you
you
willing to
do,
listen, right?
let's say, beg your pardon?
Nor are you willing to listen when someone tells you have an issue.
Right, right. It's not me. It's got to be you, buddy. And so people don't know this, but they blame each other, target each other, hurt each other emotionally. But it's also the easiest place for coercive control, which I don't think I've talked about up to now. But coercive control, where one person really wants to dominate another person's everyday life, like who you can talk to, who you can see, where you can go, all of that. And that's how these high conflict personalities almost take their partners hostage. And it often really hurts their self esteem. They become more and more helpless, more and more controlled, and it becomes more dangerous. Sometimes people kill the person they're trying to control, especially if they want to leave. There's that risk. Although there's a lot of safe places to go, shelters and such, so that someone's concern listening to this is get help. There's the hotline.org for domestic violence assistance. There's the Workplace Bullying Institute. If you have a workplace issue and you want help, go to I think it's workplacebullyinginstitute.com or .org. Anyway, so there's resources, but yes, family is where most of this shows up, and high conflict divorce, that's a lot of my work has been as a lawyer and a mediator with high conflict divorces. I've stopped doing those now and just do consultation. But for like 15 years as a family lawyer, what's driving the high conflict divorces is primarily high conflict personalities who blame, 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 and don't take responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Bill, just to kind of wrap this up in the when we're looking at the future, one of the things I think about is kind of when we look back in the last decade, the rise of social media and how that's fueled narcissism based on the way we reward people. The more dramatic you are, the more attention you try to grab. Sometimes it comes through fame. Sometimes you get rewarded with money and social status. That's just the way the social capital has been built around in our society, particularly in the modern
Mhm.
ones. And I think about where AI is could potentially fuel this even further. There was a survey reported by The Verge in 2023 that said 56% of respondents believe people would develop emotional relationships with their AI. So whether that's using something like ChatGPT or Gemini, whatever, Grok, whatever it might be. And one thing that is certainly evident in these AI models is I've noticed that it can actually feed narcissism, where you can talk about something that you're going through emotionally and it'll say, you're totally right to say it, think of that way. Here's further evidence of why you're right. And sometimes some things that you're thinking about, but it basically the output that you're going to get is from the input that you're putting in at the end of the day with AI.
Right.
And where do you see all this going with AI being adopted more and more and social media continuing to rise and younger kids getting access to social media earlier? Where are we going with the world of narcissism and high conflict personalities if we look 20 years down the road?
I think there's two directions, bad and good. I think seeing AI as a tool has a lot of potential to do things for us that we do that are boring, unnecessary, etc. And there's a lot of potential to make things easier. I think So much is how we manage it. And I think people need a lot of education. First of all, they need a lot of education about high conflict personalities to know that there are people out there who will impersonate other people, including yourself. Everybody's at risk of somebody pretending, Bill Eddy said this when he didn't say this at all. Then Sean Kim said this when Sean Kim didn't say that at all. So I see a necessity for education, in which case it doesn't have to destroy humanity. But part of the education is understanding the human beings behind the video, behind the recording, behind the whatever it is that you're watching or listening to or reading. That there are people who will manipulate that, will manipulate you. I think there's a temptation to form relationships that we have control over. And a lot of us, maybe most of us, spend more time than we should on our electronic devices, because we can, and it feels rewarding. I type something in my computer and it does exactly what I told it to do. Um, our phones, etc. And there's something appealing but dangerous about that. The more isolated you become in your own universe that you control, the less happy you become, because we're built as humans to interact with other people, to learn from other people, to get energy from other people. And already that's becoming a problem I see with the internet, that people with a problem find other people and form a group and then see it's us against the world and reinforce their own bad behavior rather than saying, and I still want to get along with the world. And, we're concerned people are dating less. People are, having less sex. They're having less intimacy. They're having families later or not at all, and that living a life you have a lot of control over isn't necessarily the happiest life. And so I think with AI, just as they say for kids in high school now, we're going to put your phone in a cubby until the day's over and you're going to interact with people, your peers. I think we're going to need to do that with AI and say, okay, this is a AI free zone. My communication with you isn't going to be through AI. I think we need to have it figure out its place, and we still have to figure out the place of our cell phones and the place of other internet options. That's, to me, the thing, is setting limits, setting human limits on our technology is probably the biggest challenge of the generations right now. And so I guess that's my answer.
Bill, you said something really interesting, which is we tend to prioritize relationships that we have control over.
Yeah.
Do you think that realm of relationships of prioritizing control, do you think that goes beyond technology and AI relationships? Do you think that we tend to over prioritize even human relationships where we have some sort of control over them?
I th I think that's a human tendency, and in today's world, you can actually do that more. We're seeing that, like, with housing, where people move to communities with people that look like them, and so we're probably less mixed and integrated than we were, 30 years ago, because people can afford to live anywhere they want. And so we're missing that integration with people who are different. A lot of today's issues with immigration are people are uncomfortable with people who are different. And yet humanity's been immigrating and migrating for, uh, as I understand it, at least 60,000, maybe 100,000 years, and that we stimulate each other from that. We innovate from that, that we learn from that. And so the more we can kind of isolate ourselves in a little group that feels really cozy and nice and safe, the more we'll become less happy and actually more paranoid. We'll be more paranoid about everybody else out there. You know, people talk about like going to the moon and having their own community where everybody's happy and nobody bothers them. Well, if you have your own community, you're not going to all be that happy. We need this stimulate. We're adventurous beings, and that's where I think we can control AI and have a place for it, and that we need to have relationships that we can't totally control because they can give us so much more. And we see attempts at that, like with domestic violence, where someone with power and control over someone else, and that person becomes more and more diminished because of that. So I don't know if that's a good analogy, but
Yeah,
we
it is.
need
It
skills
is.
to get along with humans and machines.
Um, and just to kind of bring up the last point is for someone that has dealt with high conflict personalities, someone just whether it's domestic abuse, whether it's someone in their office relationship, how can someone rebuild their confidence that may have been lost through this relationship, especially later on in their lives after experiencing this?
Yeah, there's a lot of steps. The one I say the first step is what you tell yourself, your self-talk and changing that. Because when someone's in a controlling, coercive, controlling relationship, they start telling themselves, you know, I'm not very good. I'm incompetent. I need to be taken care of. I shouldn't speak up. I'm stupid. Whatever, that they start repeating what they've been told to themselves. And they need to give themselves encouraging statements or affirmations like, I'm a good person. I don't deserve this. Um, I have strengths and skills. I have the right to develop myself. And nobody has the right to abuse me, regardless if I've made mistakes. Um, because abusers say, "Well, you made a mistake last year, so I'm still punishing you for that." And that no one has the right to abuse you. I deserve better. Um, so what you tell yourself is, I think, a first step because you can do that wherever you are, even if you're still in an abusive relationship. To say, you know, I don't deserve this. I'm choosing to continue here a little bit longer while I get myself organized, but I don't deserve this. And that's clear. Um, I think getting professional help, getting a therapist to help talk through, you know, what were the warning signs that made you miss this? Um, what are your strengths and skills and qualities, and how can you really build that up and take some risks, meeting people, trying new activities, things like that. And then also getting a support community. Um, support, I worked for a while in substance abuse treatment as a therapist and totally amazed by how AA has helped save so many people's lives and has a community you can go to anywhere in the world. There's an AA meeting. And so people with an alcohol issue and recovering from that, finding a group that addresses what your concerns are, same with Narcotics Anonymous and such. So finding a support group, um, you know, church, synagogue, mosque, whatever your belief system is, human beings need other people and they need the positive input that we get. 80 to 90% of people are not high conflict people. But high conflict people take 90% of people's time when they're in their life,
Mm.
worrying, where are they? What are they doing? All of that. So get educated, learn about it. And if you're in a problem situation, get a lawyer, get a mediator. Don't be alone. That's the key thing. Talk to someone so that you're not isolated because you don't deserve the behavior that high conflict people give you. Um, That's the problem. It's not you, it's a behavior that's coming at you, and you can make decisions to make that change.
Yeah, totally agree. And just to circle back on that point around self talk and the
Yeah,
words that you choose to use to describe a particular situation or yourself or even life. Some people see life as a battle or war. That means oftentimes you need to constantly struggle in life in order to make it, in order to go through this world. It's a very different way to look at life than if someone was to say life is a game or life is a dance or life is a movie. And
right.
I think the words that you choose to use to describe yourself is really critical, especially if you've been, yeah, faced with bullying or having experiences like this. So, yeah, Bill, I think those are a really great solution for people to take away with. And I appreciate you. I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. I want to make sure people get your books, Five Types of People Who Can Ruin Your Life, and our new world of adult bullies, how to spot them and how to stop them. Where else can people learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
So our website, highconflictinstitute.com, has all our resources. Like I said, I do a lot of consultation now. I'm not acting as a lawyer, mediator, or therapist anymore. I've had like 15 years with each of those careers. But I put it all together in consulting with people about high conflict situations. We also have a lot of training. We have videos people can get or skills that we teach. Of course, a lot of books, and the books are available anywhere. Amazon, you can get them from our website. Amazon independent bookstores, I always put in a plug for them. Um, and many of my books are also ebooks, so you can get them on Kindle or the the Apple app, etc. Um, and let's see what else we got. Oh, audiobooks too. People drive around now much more and listen to some of this. Um, we also have free articles. We got about 50 or more free articles about dealing with high conflict situations that anybody can get. We like having free information as well as the paid work that we do. We also have our own podcast called It's All Your Fault, dealing with high conflict personalities. So you can look that up. I do that with my uh, business partner, Megan Hunter. We're co hosts on the podcast. So, and like I said, Amazon's got all the books too. So we're easy to find.
Beautiful. Well, go out and find them, guys. Thank you so much, Bill. Appreciate your time and hope to have you back. Cheers, guys.
Thanks so much, Sean. I've really enjoyed this. You ask all the good questions and you have a nice, relaxed atmosphere, which helped me just pour out everything I could think of to tell you. So
A lot of
thank
great
you.
insights. Thank you.